Good afternoon. Quick invitation to our panelists to open all cameras at this time.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Ann Enever, and on behalf of the High Commission of Canada, I'm pleased to extend a warm welcome to our Conversations Canada series. We are delighted to have our panelists joining us today from across Canada, the Bahamas, and Jamaica, and of course, you, our audience. It is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mr. Robert Hill, who has a wealth of experience in smart city development here in Jamaica and also brings to the discussion the wider Caribbean perspective. Mr. Hill, Chief Executive Officer and Town Clerk in the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation, has been working in the service of the government of Jamaica in excess of 27 years, and he is regarded as a specialist in local governance. He was appointed CEO of the City of Kingston in March 2014, prior to which he was a Senior Director in the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development and Project Manager for the Enhancing Civil Society Participation in Local Government for Community Safety Project, funded by the United Nations Development Program. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Political Science and International Relations and a Master of Science in Governance and Public Policy from the University of the West Indies, Jamaica. In addition, he has participated in several local and international fora on subjects ranging from risk management, city and municipal management, community development, social protection, music and culture, regional integration, and of course, international trade. In November 2010, he was awarded the prestigious International Visitor Leadership Program Scholarship from the United States of America. Mr. Hill is a member of the American Society for Public Administration, the American Society of Black Administrators, and is a board member of the International Visitor Leadership Program based in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Without further ado, I turn it over to you, Mr. Robert Hill. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Leslie Ann, for that wonderful introduction. I almost did not recognize whom you were speaking about until I had to look back and to say, oh, it's actually me. Let me also extend a very warm welcome to Her Excellency, Emina Tudakovic, our High Commissioner to Jamaica and the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, and the Cayman Islands. Thankfully, we are so delighted, Your Excellency, that you are resident here in Kingston, Jamaica. And so, comparative to the temperatures back home, it is an extra warm welcome to you, Your Excellency. And thank you for the opportunity to participate and serve on this platform, certainly through this very fruitful and good discussion we're about to have this afternoon. Let me also extend a welcome to all our participants right across the region and in the world who have joined us this afternoon for this very important discussion on sustainable construction practices, are particularly focused on the Bahamas this afternoon. And so, without further ado, and with my my gratitude, I would like to now introduce formally our host, if I may use that term, Her Excellency Emina Tudakovic, the Canadian High Commissioner to the Bahamas. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, no pun intended, especially to anybody joining us from Canada. I've learned a long time ago not to talk about weather whenever we're fall, winter. It's been terrible here. It did rain yesterday, right, everybody. So thank you, Mr. Hill, for the really warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here. My greetings as well to Ms. McMinn, Ms. Duran and Mr. Houston. Bonne année. Happy New Year. I cannot believe we're somehow almost already in mid-January. But it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this first Conversations Canada 2022. And today we're focusing on smart cities which is exploring the best practices of smart, sustainable cities in implementing frontier technologies in the Caribbean. I'm particularly pleased to share this platform with the Canadian Green Building Council, the Alberta-based Smart, Sustainable, Resilient Infrastructure Association, Wasley Construction Company Limited, a leading Bahamian country with its founding principal originally from North Vancouver. My hometown's Vancouver, so I have a slight Vancouver bias. And of course, our moderator, who brings a regional perspective as the Chief Executive Officer and Town Clerk of the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation here in Jamaica. Today's forum is also the first day of our 3-day annual Canada-Bahamas Business Mission. This virtual mission is a strategic event dedicated to connecting Canadian and Bahamian potential investors, customers, suppliers, developers, and business partners. Day 2 of the event will factor Canada's participation in a premier business event, the Bahamas Business Outlook. And day 3 is anchored around pre-arranged one-on-one business meetings. Smart cities are an exciting wave of the future where cutting-edge technology is used to improve the quality of urban life while also reducing climate footprints and promoting long-term resilience and sustainability. It is also an area where, even in the most advanced countries, there's much scope for growth and additional activity. In Canada, the 2021 Global Smart City Index ranked the City of Toronto within the top 15 smart cities of the world, and Canadian firms, including some of those present today, are leading experts in developing smart city solutions across a wide variety of industries, making cities safer, more efficient, and more responsive. Canadian firms also provide expertise in artificial intelligence, healthy buildings, energy management, and building controls, and have a well-established reputation in energy-efficient homes and buildings, enabling occupants to achieve higher energy efficiency improvements and standards. I'm therefore also very pleased to welcome the 10 Canadian infrastructure and clean tech companies participating in the Bahamas Business Mission. These include Coles Associates Limited, DBO International, Diminoff, Enerpan Building Systems, Harborside Engineering Consultants, Humpback Hydro Incorporated, Nexus Coastal Resource Management Limited, Sprung Instant Structures, Scott Associates Limited, Tarragon Environmental Technologies Incorporated. The key areas of expertise they represent include systems and building solutions ranging from the Internet of Things for optimizing the operational processes of cities and increasing the sustainability and safety of infrastructure, to high-performance buildings, building envelope kits, and other innovative structures. Off-grid developments, including storage offering technologies, civil infrastructure, conventional industrial sectors, and transportation, including commercialization through public-private partnerships and alternative delivery methods. Their expertise also includes renewable energy to support ongoing efforts to contribute to cleaner, safer, and more sustainable energy and water sectors. Consulting architectural engineering with practices in transportation, geotechnical, bridge and marine engineering, water, wastewater, and infectious waste treatment, energy efficiency, resiliency, and sustainability projects. Canada and the Bahamas share common concerns around issues of disaster recovery, climate change, infrastructure development, energy and technology, and all are important to the advancement of our respective economies. I also further seek to reaffirm Canada's interest in collaborating with the Bahamas and the Caribbean on climate resilience, as well as on greener and bluer economies, with a focus on smart and green infrastructure and clean energy and clean tech. We've all had a challenging last couple of years and weeks and months, and we know that some challenges await us in coming months, but I continue to look forward to a brighter year ahead. Through collaboration and partnership, we can work together for a sustainable future. I'm really eager to hear what the experts here will tell us about smart cities. So over to you and have a lovely dialogue and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That was indeed broad-ranging and comprehensive, and therefore now sets the tone for this afternoon's discussions with Canada. Allow me to introduce Your Excellency and panelists and guests, our own Mayor of Kingston, His Worship the Mayor, Senator and Councillor Delroy Williams, who has popped in just to speak a few minutes on the dream that Kingston is becoming. Over to you, Mayor.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I don't want to take too much of your time, but the Chief Executive Officer has asked me, since I'm in the building, to just say a few words on the posturing of Kingston and how we are repositioning Kingston. And it's important. The reposition would include our sustainable approach to development and developing our infrastructure in a sustainable way. We have also been grappling with the issue of flooding, and initial preliminary studies show that we are having enhanced stormwater runoff because, in a lot of cases, because of the number of buildings that are being constructed and the building practices from single-family residential homes to multifamily development. And so we have been introducing in a lot of the developments that we approve measures geared at reducing, at managing stormwater on site, and to ensure that we reduce the stormwater runoff, which is causing flooding across the municipality which causes flooding across the municipality when we have major rainfall. We have also been doing studies in the eastern section of the municipality, which is where we have experienced numerous landslides. And so we have been in partnership with the University of Chester and other central government agencies, we have been doing research into landslides. And we are almost nearing completion of those research. And those research would help us would inform our land use policy in terms of whether we have no building zones in those areas, or if we are accommodating development in those areas, then we have to basically, we know what engineering solutions we will have to implement in order to have development in those areas. So it's basically to inform our land use policy. But I know I've got 3 minutes, so I'll just quickly say that Kingston is repositioning itself as a destination city. Previously, Kingston was seen primarily as not a tourism city. Most of the north of Jamaica is usually where most persons would go or regard as a tourism city, as for tourism. When we took administration of the city of Kingston, we decided that Kingston has all that it takes to position itself as a tourism city. It's the birthplace of all the music, the genre of music that came out of Jamaica, going right back into the 60s. So if you talk about reggae, dancehall, ska, all of that came out of Kingston. Kingston is an entertainment capital. It's a cultural capital. It's listed as a creative city of music by UNESCO. So we felt that we could position the city of Kingston as a tourism city. And we have been doing that since 2016. We now have cruise ship arriving in the Kingston Harbor. We were able to construct a floating pier in the Kingston Harbor. It was very important for us because we did explore how we would do it, because the Kingston Harbor, we have what is known as Port Royal, the town of Port Royal. And below the waters there is the remains of parts of Port Royal that was damaged by earthquake in the late 1600. And therefore we could not construct a regular pier, cruise ship pier there. And so we had to explore to find the innovative ways of doing it. And we did find a Dutch company, and that company constructed a floating pier, which we are now using for cruise ships in the Kingston Harbor. We had 2 ships arrived in January. So we have already started to reposition the city of Kingston as a tourism city, a destination city. And we are pursuing that vision. A lot more to go in terms of the infrastructure. We have been doing revetment works to protect the shoreline protection works along the Kingston Harbor. We are 90% complete with that. and so forth. So there are meaningful projects. I know this is not the forum to go through those projects in any detail, but just to highlight that the City of Kingston is repositioning itself and is pursuing the vision of a destination city, what we like to call the Pearl of the Antilles. And we are embracing the concepts of smart city, of caring city, an international city. And there are various approaches we are taking. And so we welcome this forum and we expect to learn a lot in this forum. And so thanks for hearing me, and thanks for putting this forum together. I'm pretty sure that it will help a lot of cities in terms of the information that will flow from it, and it will make us far more informed and create the forum for dialogue and the network of persons to have continued dialogue after this forum. Thank you very much.
Let me thank Mayor Williams again for that very concise overview of where we are as Kingston as we continue to develop, and of course share these best practices with our partners, particularly in this case, the Bahamas. And so let me move on swiftly to introduce our next speaker, Miss Jenny McMinn. Jenny is a board of directors of the Canadian Green Building Council and the managing director of Urban Equation, a lead partner in estate development across North America. And of course, she is a major consultant, highly sought after expert in this area. And so, Jenny, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hill. And I'll have you do my intros more frequently. I'm more energized than usual, so I appreciate that. And thank you to the High Commission for having me here today. I won't talk about weather because it's very cold here, and I'm jealous of many of the attendees here, just even in spirit. So I'll jump right in. As Mr. Hill noted, I do wear many hats in the realm of sustainability in Canada, in particular in the real estate space. As noted, I'm vice chair on the board of directors of the Canadian Green Building Council, where that group's mission is really to lead and accelerate the transformation towards high-performing, healthy green buildings, homes, and communities across Canada. What does that mean? They're typically looking at establishing industry standards, developing best practice and guidelines, as well as the associated tools, and quite a lot of advocacy and education work. So I do think in terms of the conversation today, there's likely quite a lot of opportunity to share resources that exist and collaborate and build on the work that has been set up through that Green Building Council. In terms of my day-to-day job, as Mr. Hill noted, I'm both the partner of a private development firm called Windmill Developments, as well as responsible for running the advisory aspect of our business. Windmill has been delivering sustainable products in Canada over the last 20 years. Our first project out in Victoria was the first LEED Platinum project in Canada, called Dockside Green, and we continue to evolve our learning. There's quite a lot of good and important work to do, and I'm really happy to be here today. I see my role on the panel is setting a bit of context, providing some big priorities that I'm seeing across Canada that may be relevant to the folks on the call, and really just starting to set the stage for the other panelists to dive into a bit more detail. So to kick off, I just want to talk a little bit about our development and advisory work, and just really address the fact that our whole being, our business is centered around the fact that there is an immediate and urgent need to change how we're building. This is a problem with an identifiable solution, but it does require urgent action. The hard work, research, and testing and innovation is ongoing. And I do think we need to, through exchanges like these, learn from one another so that we can mitigate the impending climate change. So one of the key ways that we look at sustainability is in terms of our planetary footprint. And essentially, as as Canadians, we're using about 5 planets worth of resources. One does not need to be an ecologist or biologist to understand we've only got one, and we're consuming at a rate that cannot be replenished. And so I will say that in doing a little bit more research in the Caribbean, you're not consuming at the same rate that we are in Canada, on average between 2 to 3 planets worth of resources. But there's still a lot of work to do. So while I'm happy to hear that there's less intense natural resource use based on the lifestyle and the building strategies that you're using, there's still quite a lot of work to do. The other key part of our work is really recognizing that there's a broader ethos around sustainability, or what we often refer to as one planet living. And this really acknowledges that while there are environmental and planetary issues that absolutely need to be resolved, those issues cannot be looked at in silos. And so to us in the work that we're doing and continuing to inspire across the country, sustainability really does need to encompass equity, affordability, and regeneration. And they're all interrelated. And so, we really need to, as a global society, work to break down these silos and collaborate so we can hit the change that's really required. That said, while there are many different topics I could lean into, I have chosen to lean into carbon and energy efficiency specifically. In general, in Canada, the environmental landscape and focus has really been taking a keen shift. I would say in the early 2000s, a big focus on energy conservation. More recently, in the last 5+ years, the shift has been away from strictly reducing the units of energy needed to keep our buildings going, to really a shift towards mitigating climate change. And what we're seeing is that most municipalities across the country are now taking steps in the right direction, declaring a state of climate emergency. And many have now also set emission reduction targets, with several municipalities ushering towards a zero emission strategy between 2030 and 2050. At the Canadian Green Building Council, and also in the work that I do on a daily basis, we really recognize the next decade as critical, in that any new built work is really with us for some time. And in order for us to maintain these emission targets, we really need to be focused on not just energy conservation, but where is that energy coming from, and how do we mitigate the total emissions associated with that? On that journey, the Canadian Green Building Council a couple of years ago established a standard called the Zero Carbon Standard. And I think it's an important step forward in that it does provide a guide, a method, and a process for documenting, defining how do we reduce carbon emissions within the building sector. And one of the critical aspects of this concept of zero carbon is really looking to balance out how much energy is needed to keep a building comfortable and occupiable, and can you balance out those emissions? Well, firstly, reduce them, and secondly, if there's more needed than what can be, there's more needed, then there's also a responsibility to invest in renewable energy on or off site to help to balance out that equation, so that we're not consuming more than our footprint. And so what does that mean in practice? In our daily work, both our own development projects as well as those that we're advising on, we typically tackle this approach towards zero carbon in 4 basic steps. Firstly, passive design, which really means, where is the building sitting? How can you avoid the need for energy in the first place? What are building envelopes that are airtight, keeping unwanted outdoor air from coming inside? How do you create those in as thermally efficient a way as possible? Again, so to ultimately with the goal of avoiding the need for energy in the first place. The great news there is the more you can do that through passive design, the less money that needs to be spent on complicated mechanical and electrical systems. The next step is then, once you've done the best in terms of mitigating mitigating the need for energy through passive design. The next step is what systems are needed electrically and mechanically. And there are a number of low energy systems that can really help drive down associated emissions. One of the trends in Canada is a shift away from natural gas heating towards electric heating. And that it has some system impacts as well. A lot of common technology, becoming more common technology in Canada in this shift away from natural gas heating to electric heating is towards systems like heat pumps, like variable refrigerant drive systems, and also quite a budgeting interest in technologies like geothermal. So once we have the kind of the building form, design, and envelopes situated, we've invested in the active systems mechanically and electrically. The next key piece of this carbon journey is really understanding where the energy is coming from in the first place. So in Canada, our energy supply across the country varies significantly by province. And many provinces are working towards, at the electrical grid level, at reducing the amount of emissions associated with generating and eventually supplying to the end customer. But there's still quite a lot of work to do in that way. I see in the Bahamas that the majority of your electricity is coming from natural gas and also diesel. So there is a big opportunity at the supply level outside of the buildings to really focus on a cleaner mix of energy. So that could be done at the national level or at the utility level. Or there's an opportunity in the kind of fourth step towards zero carbon is to generate energy on site. Typical technologies that we're seeing across Canada, photovoltaics are so solar at collecting solar energy and either reusing in the building or selling back to the grid is starting to more consistently demonstrate investable return, and we're continuing to see those prices go down. There are not as much wind across the country, but again, it depends by region. But I think both of those two renewable energy options are great solutions in Bahamas, and there is quite a lot that could be learned from precedent set here. And I see also a lot of great work emerging already on the ground. So with that, I will close off by saying I think there's quite a lot that can be learned from some of the progress that's being made in Canada, and we'd certainly love to learn more from you and all the great work that I'm seeing emerging in regards to resiliency, particularly around water and flooding. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll look forward to popping back in to answer any questions.
Thank you ever so much, Jenny. I believe that was extremely important. I was wanted to pick up a few points that you spoke about. Zero carbon methodology. How do we reduce our carbon emissions? It's a big issue across Caribbean nations right now. And how do we, in that reduction, create that balance? The building occupancy versus what is required to keep the building going whilst reducing our carbon emission footprint. Canada, as you know, has been leading in this area. And so we're quite capable of paying keen attention to all the steps that have been taken, both policy-wise and really directly, certainly in terms of reducing carbon emissions and how persons can still sustainably manage themselves within this reduction exercise. At this time, let me thank you again, Jenny, and I now welcome Mr. Mark Hewison, who is in fact in warmer climes just next door. He is in the Bahamas right now, and Mark is, of course, a founding principal and vice president of the Wosley Construction Company, which is based in the Bahamas, and is a leading innovator in sustainable construction infrastructure. I see you already addressed warmly there, Mark, so I hand over to you, Mark, for your contribution to our discussions here this afternoon.
Thanks, Robert. I just had to get rid of my mute there. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the High Commission of Canada for having me participate in this important seminar. So yes, a little bit about myself. I am originally from Canada, moved to the Bahamas in '98 for a short stint on a very large resort project, which has now turned into 24 years here and many projects. So I've been very fortunate. And I think throughout my progression here in the Bahamas over the years, we've seen a shift in how to be smarter and more environmentally responsible in the way we construct. And as time goes on, I think it's only going to improve based on what I've seen and how developers are approaching how they build and the building methods that they're asking for that have to withstand, of course, the hurricane forces that we're faced with here in the Bahamas. But I would say overall, the Bahamas is doing its part where it can to build smart, to build environmentally, to build sustainably. I know late last year, the Ministry of Works here introduced a certificate of environmental clearance form that's required by all new projects to be filled out with a real emphasis on the environment and how their project, the specific project, will impact the environment and the surrounding area. So I think there's a pretty good effort by the government here to improve things and get on more of a world standard. And they're quite aware of how the impacts of the environment and sustainability affect all citizens and all projects. So as a constructor, when we get involved in a project, normally it seems more and more we're getting it asked to participate in the pre-construction on value engineering and how to improve things in the project. And more, what's coming up is asking the contractor to work with the consultants, work with the engineers, work with the developers to find ways to improve their project, make it more sustainable, and make it more efficient. And some of those are, solar panels, different building assemblies, so that the heating, well, there is no real heating down here, which is a big plus, but the cooling loads down here account for a very large part of the energy use in the operations of any project in any building. So there's quite a bit of attention that is paid to on the cooling side and the insulation side of building envelopes and systems. So, and what I've been able to fortunately been able to do is draw on some of my past experiences in Canada and reach out to various consultants over the years from Canada that were either building envelope consultants, specialty contractors, specialty manufacturers, and introduce some of their means and methods or their products into the construction process here in the Bahamas, and with some pretty good success. So I feel quite fortunate that because of my past experience and relationships in Canada many years ago, are being able to be transferred into the Bahamas for a real benefit for all the citizens here, and to help improve however little it is, but every little bit helps when you're doing this. So and then the other thing that happened just this past summer, I was back in Vancouver visiting family, and I followed up with a few of the co-workers that I worked with on the large international airport here in the Bahamas. And one of the lead managers that was from the Vancouver firm that we partnered with introduced me to a 3D modeling company that was that he had worked with and works with developers. And so now what we're doing is we're taking on a couple of the projects that we're involved with is we partnered with this 3D modeling firm to help improve the constructability and find errors and emissions before they become a problem. And that technology that is based in Canada, we're interacting with our projects here on a weekly basis now on 2, and I can see it being implemented into all our future projects because it's just adding a ton of value, not only for us on the construction side, but all the consultants and the developers. So, and this is a product that's basically been born and bred in Vancouver, and I understand they do stuff all over the world. So that's been a big help in the last year. And then, of course, in the last year, there was all the COVID stuff that's been going on. And in construction, we were quite fortunate to really not miss a beat. I mean, we had a small little shutdown at the start of it, but because most of our work is outside and in the environment, we were very, very fortunate to stay working and keep a good part of the economy going when our major sector for the economy here in the Bahamas is tourism, and that was basically shut down for the last year and a half. So it's just opened up, thankfully to a lot of people's wishes, and we're still working through that. But I think with construction and being sustainable here, it's really we've been trying to do our bit to keep ahead of the curve and help out with everyone. So and again, we've been very fortunate with the type of projects we've been exposed to and participated in. Some of them are world class. There's the Albany Resort. We've been working out there for 10 years. And again, most of the technology and the supervision has got a little bit of a Canadian component to it. We buy some of our key materials out of Canada, just because that it's they're kind of leading edge in what we do in construction, and it's been very, very positive. Again, our big concern here in the Bahamas is hurricanes, and we went through Duran a few years ago, and we're still recovering from that. Even though it was quite isolated up in the Abacos and part of Grand Bahama, they still haven't recovered. But so it's on everyone's radar to do their little bit to help improve things here and the environment, and make sure that we can all work together to improve things. And I think what Canada has to offer in certain areas, if we can grab onto that, it's definitely going to benefit my industry in construction and other sectors here in the Bahamas. So I think that's as much as I can go on longer on construction and sustainability, but I think I've touched on a few of the items, and Robert, I think I can follow up after, and I'll pass it off to you.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you very much. One of your couple of your key points really is that the interesting thing that we also do here in Kingston, the environmental clearance certification. We may use another term here, but it's very important because it now effectively at least takes steps to properly and effectively measure environmental impact, particularly on larger projects. And of course, because there is major concern around environmental impact and degradation. So it's a very, very good step in the right direction. We also spoke about cooling loads, the demand on cooling loads, because there in fact is no need for heating in this part of the world, certainly in this region. The cooling loads account for a large percentage of energy use.
Absolutely, yes.
So we have to therefore manage and balance those demands, as Jenny would have been saying earlier. And of course, like Jamaica, the construction industry did exceedingly well comparative to other industries. And we were able to measure the success of the construction industry based certainly on how many applications we took in as the critical municipality, capital city here in Jamaica. And so we were able to measure the impact, number one, and two, the level of jobs and employment that flew from the expansion of our construction industry, whilst also ensuring that the conditions that we placed on many of the larger projects dealt with water harvesting, water retention, solar use, introduction of solar use, and the minimization on the electricity grid by using implementation of natural light and so on. You also said, Mark, that you went back home to Vancouver to visit with your old or previous partners that you worked with. I take it then that you would have had your fill of Labatt Blue whilst you were there.
Absolutely.
Good show. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And so it's, again, as we proceed with our agenda, let me introduce Tania Duran. She is the chair of the Smart City Sustainable Resilient Infrastructure Association. And she brings an incredible passion, her bio says, incredible passion to her focus on reduction of carbon emissions. She's also a consultant in her own right with Santec. So let me hand over to you, Tania Duran.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Hill, and thank you to the High Commission for allowing the Smart Sustainable Resilient Infrastructure Association to be here today. I do have a small presentation that I'd like to just present while I talk here as well, just letting you know a little bit about what SREA is and what we're doing here in Alberta with the focus really driving innovation for GHG reductions across the province of Alberta. So, you know, that vision is to revolutionize this design and construction and really the operations of our buildings so that we can achieve those goals that Jenny talked about earlier, those net zero carbon goals that we have here in Canada by 2050. And we're really doing that by accelerating the adoption of innovation and carbon solutions into our built environment. So it's a real collaborative approach, and I'll talk about some of our projects here a little later on that we have funded and are supporting to drive this innovation going forward, but really coming together as an economic powerhouse and economic development opportunity for our members overall. So right now we have a number of different areas that are part of our association. We're a not-for-profit that's governed by a board of directors comprised of many industry representatives. We also have a network of member companies, so over 64 members right now. These companies are longtime leaders in sustainability, like my own as the founding chair of this organization, but many new organizations and companies as well, who perhaps previously haven't considered themselves part of the green building industry or part of the sustainability movement that has been evolving. And I know Jenny talked about the last 5 years in that timeline, but this is a long timeline of success that Canada and various regions across Canada have had in delivering this important load. So bringing those new innovations and those new service lines into this industry so that we can start to see those collaborations and really drive innovation in those GHG reductions has been a really important component of the work that SREA has been doing with all of our members in terms of delivering that. And certainly some of the outcomes will be applicable to the regions and those of you on the line here today. So when you look at, who we actually have at the table, we have lots of building product members. So about 20% of our members are, new innovators, those who are bringing new products and innovations to the industry itself, all the way through that design and engineering. So a good chunk of that is firms like my own on the design and engineering side, really starting to evolve our own practice to consider innovative solutions to drive those reductions and really challenge ourselves to achieve those low or zero carbon building targets that are within the realm of the goals for ourselves here, and all the way through to a number of post-secondary partnerships as well. So we have partnerships with 5 post-secondary institutions across Alberta, really driving both the jobs and the job creation, as well as the potential research that will come out of each and every one of our pilot projects that we've been funding as well with our collaborative partners. So how we really serve overall is to talk about, facilitating that collaboration, being a connecting point and a hub to make sure that where we have projects and where we have innovations, we're the introductory tool to make sure we have the right expertise and vision within our market to deliver on those goals, supporting those innovative businesses through their strategic growth with programs like our business growth program. So those that are at that technology readiness level and they're really moving into a full market expansion, making sure they have the resources that are necessary for them to continue to grow, evolve within our own market, and then export into markets like your market and bring those services and products to everyone. Providing funding is probably one of the key ones that we've been working on in the last 18 months. So really showcasing and validating those low carbon solutions on what we're calling our bricks and mortar projects, so the pilot projects, driving that innovation and actually seeing those technologies adopted and seeing the research and the data to support those GHG reductions as well. That second piece is that knowledge and data expertise. So not only are we learning and we're putting new products and innovations into built projects, we are then taking that data, and part of our commitment is to work with our post-secondary institutions and work with industry to then share that data, share that knowledge back out, and to continue to do it. And certainly that is something that the design industry overall has not been good about historically. We have great innovations, but we tend to stop them. They stop on a project by project basis. We don't always see those replicate themselves throughout industry for a variety of reasons. So, and then continuing training and upskilling our own workforce and being prepared with low carbon innovators. So this is a model that can really be replicated in a number of jurisdictions in terms of driving these reductions. So we have that path forward into market transformation with the Green Building Technology Network. So our activities right now are very much focused on programs that have been supported by Alberta Innovates and Western Economic Diversification Canada. Our program includes 4 key pillars to create a foundation for the adoption of energy and GHG reducing solutions for our buildings. It all started with the building of that collaborative network that I've talked about within our membership, and really being a place to learn from one another, develop business opportunities, and have the test bed projects, the business growth program, and then that future skills network, so that we're continuing to leverage what we've learned from each one of our projects into that new network as well. So I'm going to share a couple of our testbed projects and some examples, just so we have some ideas here later on. So our testbed projects really focus on energy and CO2, so demonstrating that energy and GHG emission reduction from the operational efficiency and embodied carbon within the potential, and how we can then replicate that in other buildings. So we're really focused on those technologies that are easily replicable to really drive them to a mainstream adoption. Collaboration is that other key piece, so representation from a variety of fields and expertise that will really drive the learning potential, so we don't just have any one discipline or any one building owner receiving that information. It's that industry connection, innovation, and then capturing and sharing. So those are those two, you know, that inclusion of technology and products is certainly there. The testbed projects make up the bulk of our funded activities. We have grant funds to test and validate those innovative solutions all the way through, and improve that building performance. And then the goal is to capture those results and share them. And I talked a little bit about that already. We don't adopt or promote innovation simply because it's new. So that's something that I think is key. New isn't always better, but because it's really been supported with early research, prototype results in other regions, that it really demonstrates that there's potential to be successful in Alberta's environment. And I know we've talked a lot about cooling already today. On the flip side, we can talk about heating in the same environment, and often what works in an energy efficiency strategy for heating sometimes translates into some of those cooling strategies directly as well. So innovation can include technology, products, and processes. So it's not always a widget necessarily. Sometimes it's a process or just a collaboration of multiple projects to get to a cohesive and holistic solution. So for those of you that are familiar with the technology readiness levels, we're really looking for solutions that are between a 7 and a 9 that ensure that those testbed projects, once they're completed, are ready for that widespread adoption and that market transformation. And really the goal is for us to demonstrate energy use and GHG emissions that can be replicated over and over. So the following here that I'll talk about are just a few examples of some projects that we funded that might be of particular relevance to this audience. And really work within some of this expertise. So this first one here is a residential project. So we talked about residential construction. So energy use overall as a result of being more efficient, some automated operation as well that is going to be there. I'm just going to automated operation of the home lighting, which avoided some GHG reductions from significant reduction of copper wire. And that reduction came from the installation of wire-free solutions. So the switches within this particular project will not have wires. So the product can be installed at no additional cost to builders. It's an Alberta-based tech manufacturer. And really there's an embodied carbon piece here in that we're not producing the wires, we're not transporting them to site as well. And we're really seeing the ability to also leverage some of the movement within that home as well. So, as we tend to sometimes see people age in place and other technologies where we need to make some changes to some of those lighting solutions, it provides that flexibility within the home as well as we look at some of those flexible solutions that are the benefits outside of the GHG reductions. Another project that we have funded is some residential deep energy retrofits. So we're looking at 3 single family homes with some unique features. So that the software itself that'll be implemented can process and refine the optimization of the home itself. There's, in addition to these 3 homes, there is a training program for trades that is being considered by this project team. So starting to take the learnings out of each one of these homes and really adopt the solutions that have been recognized and successes in terms of those GHG reductions so that we can continue to educate our trades and network as well. And this last one here is the, there's two more, the commercial building envelope program. So this one doesn't fit the typical definition of a smart solution, but it's a great product innovation in terms of commercial building envelopes. It's a Canadian manufacturer of a fiberglass curtain wall. So looking at vacuum insulated glass, and it's a high performance facade that is expected to provide great thermal comfort. So again, that transition from where we may have a heating dominated environment to where you may have a cooling dominant environment as well. And certainly some solutions that will drive that. And this is a really good example of a project because you see the number of our partners and our members at the bottom of that slide that are working to collaborate together to try some of these solutions within this test bed pilot so that we can drive that innovation and find some real bricks and mortar projects on the ground and then share that data. And then finally, the smart ventilation program. So this one is a building retrofit project. So the building itself, ATB Place here in Edmonton, was built in 1970. It's had multiple upgrades all the way throughout that time to make it an award-winning high-performance building. But this addition of that dynamic VAV technology that they're including is really seen as an optimization or an opportunity to optimize their systems even further and take their reductions to that next step. So continuing to look at those that can be replicated quite readily. So that's a little bit about Surya, what we're doing, and I'm looking forward to our conversations with our panelists and everyone just talking about how we can continue to further this discussion. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Tania. That was very, very good presentation, graphically speaking, and shows the realistic view of the solutions that are being offered. You mentioned that I picked up from one of your slides that you're largely looking at serving small firms at 59% of the demand that's on your consultancy. Second, followed by institutions. So that speaks volumes. I was sort of curious in terms of where the government stands in terms of how your service point. But I see that they account for a smaller percentage in comparison to small firms and institutions. So that's a conversation, a transition that is in process, that is growing out throughout Canada. Your main focus, as you mentioned, was, of course, on sustainable design, and you have had varying results from those designs for varying reasons. And I can understand that sometimes adaptability does take time, and it's in fact difficult because change in itself is difficult, certainly in the construction industry. And of course, one key innovation I took from you, Tania, was the reduction on dependency of wiring, and of course the additional connections, quote unquote connections, that go with that. The transportation, the dependence on copper for wiring in buildings, etc. Very good innovation in terms of wireless connectivity, and that's a key innovation that I believe we should really copy and try to innovate here in the Caribbean, because we like to use our lights and we like our copper wiring and want to know that the building is properly wired. So if we can transition our thinking to a wireless technology using far more efficient carbon reduction inputs, it's been far better for all of us. So thank you very much for that presentation. As we move on, Your Excellency and panelists, I'm happy to say that we had 100 or varying around 100 participants, including us. And we're going to be opening our discussion to our panelists and our guests, industry players that are on, and who can now, we can have a free, full exchange of the ideas that have been presented, and of course, exchange those discussions in terms of how best we can fit in growing our consciousness as it relates to carbon reduction, smart city development, and of course, smart building technologies. And of course, I'd like to again thank our panelists for those very wonderful, innovative, and concise, very important pieces of information that you would have introduced to the discussion. And so we now open our discussion to our panelists and guests, and questions that anyone may want to put at this time. Please feel free using the raise hand feature, and of course it'll be properly recognized. Thank you so much. Seems that everybody is in full agreement.
So I can just start
As a
with
moderator, we have a question here from Pia Pharma. The question is, great to see innovative ideas for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. Are you including charging points for EVs in these buildings, considering each gas vehicle emits 4.6 tons of CO2 per car per year, and the galloping pace of EV adoption around the world and here in the Bahamas? Are we including designs from the perspective of supporting electric mobility? We can't have a smart city without electric vehicles. Thank you, Pia Pharma.
Any one of our panelists can address that question. Thanks.
Yeah, I can just maybe jump in first by saying, in terms of Saria, we haven't seen a project come in terms of EV adoption and providing those points, but certainly as a standard of practice, we are seeing EV adoption and EV readiness across our designs becoming mainstream as well. And I think that there's another piece, and maybe Jenny will point on that as well, is that we're not just necessarily talking any longer just about cars as a transportation solution as we look to multimodal transportation. So we're also looking at solutions that include, electric bikes and scooter systems and others that require chargeability as well throughout kind of the urban context. So there's more than just that car readiness and how we actually transition from cars to other multimodal transportation opportunities.
I can jump in. Thank you, Tania. There's lots of pieces to this question, but I think the first and foremost is, what is the boundary of emissions that's being defined for a project? And a lot of the work that we do are for communities, either renewed communities or new communities. And often the first conversation is around, what are the aggregate emissions that we're influencing by building or renewing an asset or multiple assets? And so recently in the city of Toronto, we'd collaborated with a group, Sidewalk Labs, which is an innovation group within the Google group of companies. And one of their mandates was really towards climate positive. And so they certainly looked at all aspects of carbon emissions, including within the buildings, within the transportation sector, any water that needed to be moved around, and also waste. And so there are a number of different methodologies for calculating that, for defining what's the appropriate boundary that you can influence in your built work. The other thing I would just mention, in the city of Toronto now, through our green development standards, there is a mandate to hardwire in for electric vehicle charging stations. Hardwiring is a mandate, and some minimum number of spaces are required depending on the type of development. I'm seeing quite a big uptake in that in this market anyways. and lots of interesting infrastructure from a municipal level around charging outside of the home, which also becomes an essential aspect of creating an appropriate network so that people can safely maneuver and refuel when needed. So we are seeing a lot more uptake here, and developers are both proactively and sometimes being forced to implement the EV charging infrastructure in new buildings.
Oh, thank you, ladies. I see we have a question here from Bob Robertson, Bahamas Technical and Vocational Institute. He's a former city planner and city manager in Canada, and would like the panel to suggest, as the first step in the smart city, we all have many pressing priorities. What is the low-hanging fruit? That's Bob's question. Anyone can take that one. What is the low-hanging fruit?
I'm probably a little biased on this one myself, as I think the low-hanging fruit is maybe where we have both innovation from industry itself, coupled with policy to improve performance and requirements. So, you know, as human nature dictates that we like to do as little as possible. That's just our nature sometimes. So how we can couple those together, that drive for innovation and GHG reductions, with a strong policy that signals the market that changes and adoption is coming, and that we're ready for that innovation, is likely the very first step.
Excellent. Any other responses to Bob's question? I think that covers it. There's a question here from Jillian Roberts, Humpback Hydro Incorporated, for Ms. McMinn. Read the third point on the zero carbon standard you discussed. Is the long-term life, in quotes, of emissions referring to the end of life of the technology, or the emission levels over time? And she says, thank you. You got that, Ms. McMinn?
I was reading as you were also reading out loud, Robert. I'm not sure what the question is there, but I can speak to the life cycle of materials and how the standard looks at it, and then maybe Pamela, if you have sorry, Jillian, if you have a follow-up and I'm not answering your question, let me know. So essentially what I'm taking away from Jillian's comment here is really addressed under the concept of embodied carbon. So everything that we use, purchase, and pull together to build a building has already emitted a number of emissions before it even gets to site. So both in the extraction of the raw materials, the manufacturing, and then also the transportation from both of those sites to the actual building project. And so that process is essentially captures the embodied emissions of materials before they're even constructed. The question, Jillian, that I think you're leaning into is there's also emissions required to once that product hits its end of life, to decommission or to recycle or potentially be put into waste. So how the zero carbon standard addresses that is there is a requirement to quantify embodied emissions and offset a minimum amount of emissions associated with embodied carbon. But certainly happy to dive into any more specific detail if I've missed your question.
Got it. Any other contributions to that response, or I think we're good? I think part of the discussion really should also be focused around the policy development and the real political will, if I may, around developing these policies and maintaining focus on these policies as they go through the iterative changes. Both Tania and Jenny would have actually indicated, certainly in their responses, that many of these questions really fall to the policymakers and the commitment that it requires of us as policymakers and leaders in our own environments to make that initial change and really have sustainable positions and robust debate around transitioning into very new innovations that will speak to a lower level of dependency. And of course, looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in those debates whilst we craft those policies. So I believe these questions are pretty pointed, they're pretty timely, and also require of leaders at the policy level the commitment to change our points of view and our dependency on carbon fuels and also emissions that create further damage down the line. Looking for some more questions, certainly from the participants. I see where Chris, oh, I have one here from Gary Scavella. What primary role will AI play in smart cities, and should society be concerned? That's to everyone. From what primary will artificial intelligence play in smart cities, and should society be concerned? Jenny?
I'll take a first. Why not? It's a big question. I won't get into the deep philosophical aspects of artificial intelligence, but I can offer that I think based on the urgency that I mentioned earlier, there are no silver bullets that will get us to the level of or the lack of dependency, to use your words, Mr. Hill, that we're currently placing on planetary resources. And so I think AI does have a valuable part to play. It needs to be managed like any other technical solution to think about what are the impacts, risks, et cetera. One related topic in particular that was leaned into quite heavily in the climate positive proposal put forward by Sidewalk Labs and Google here in Toronto was very much around data and access to data. And while I think much of the design solutions were entirely around how do you most efficiently deliver, as an example, low carbon energy at the lowest price, and that required a handheld app that people could interact with on a regular basis. But it did also require that the app had access to data, energy data within the suites, as an example. To me, that's a low risk, but there are some higher risk data points that can drive city-based solutions like movement of people, tracking of individuals, that kind of thing. So I don't think there is a blanket solution that says AI is bad. I think it is one tool that we can and should leverage, but of course, with a grain of salt of really thinking through all the longer term ramifications.
Mark,
Agreed. And
to come in? Oh, I'm sorry, Tania.
sorry, I was gonna say, I can just add to that as well. The project that I referred to, which was the existing building project that's been funded by Surya, has an AI component to it as well on the VAV piece. So, the intent there is that it really can be an enhancement to those areas where traditional building operations are inefficient, and it can now respond to some of those dynamic needs in the operations as well. So much like was already said, it's about where we can find some of those risks for the savings at the same time. So we are looking within one of our projects at some of that AI adoption and implementation. So watch for more data, and our executive director, I think, will post a link to that project in the chat as well.
Okay. Mark, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, mainly we're mandated what to build and how to build it, and we have very little say in the means and methods and the technologies that's to be used. But one thing I know that's becoming more and more prevalent is BIM systems, building information management systems, so to control the MEP systems in the buildings and help them to be as efficient as possible to lower energy costs and thereby, lessen the carbon footprint. So.
Okay, thank you. I see another question here from Chris Milley, which says much of the discussion has been focused on materials and energy use, but from a climate adaptation perspective, has there been similar focus on design changes to accommodate extreme wind regimes, changes in ambient air quality, for example, smoke or smog, or changes in precipitation, rain diversion in the Caribbean, or snow loading in Canada? Very, very critical question. Very critical question.
Well, I can say that the design wind loads in the Bahamas seems to be going up every other year here. I mean, when I first came to the Bahamas, I believe the the design hurricane loads were at 160, and now we're involved in a project, a new airport terminal in the Exumas, and the design wind loads are over 200 miles an hour now. So, and it just seems like, as time goes on, that these international building codes are just getting more and more stringent and addressing the concerns of our changing weather patterns. So it just shows you that it has changed since I've been here in the short time that I've been here, really. So.
Thanks, Mark. Any other responses, Jenny or Tania?
I just made in the complexity, like the topic here is really around resiliency, and there isn't a static point anymore, right? Like looking back at historical weather profiles isn't enough. And that is the typical method for engineers is to take the last 30 years of data and, make some estimates as to what an appropriate envelope, building envelope would be. The challenge, I would say, you're bang on that we need to be designing, anticipating ongoing change. The challenge is access to data, and I do think there's a role for policymakers and or industry associations to make sure that future-oriented data is available and is, consistently being used. And because it's complicated to design for an evolving climate. I think many will laugh on the call, but we're certainly anticipating a lot more cooling days in many regions across Canada, significant increases in cooling days. And for us, that could mean a fully different systems design is going to be required in the next 10 or 15 years. And so no doubt the wind loading that Mark rightly highlighted, as well as flooding, are concerns, and kind of future forecasting is needed to inform the engineers.
Great, thank you. And we have, I think we have some more questions coming in. There was one earlier from Francois Lee. I think this is from Mark directly. Will the current speaker at the time speak more on what type of projects he was involved in the Bahamas? Mark, some
okay.
more.
Mainly resort projects. We've been here, Wolsey's been around for just over 20 years, and I would say 75% of our projects in the past have been resort related. Now, we were involved with the international airport here, and that was the largest project. We joint ventured with a Canadian general contractor, and it was built by a Canadian developer that won the concession to build it for the Bahamas government. So, and that was a very successful project, a great project, very challenging at the time. It was just after the financial crash in 2008, and we managed to, the developer managed to pull it off, and we were lucky enough to be involved in the project. It was a great project. It finished ahead of schedule and under budget, which is very rarely ever heard on government projects in the Caribbean or elsewhere. So, but mainly resorts, some luxury homes, government projects we're involved with. There's an upcoming project planned here in the Bahamas. It's the Central Bank of the Bahamas. It's a very, very interesting, very bespoke project. And the main focus on it is these solar shade panels that were designed by the architect that look like a fishnet or a sea urchin type shape that goes around it. And that's a direct response to being sustainable and to lower the the heating and cooling loads on the whole building, and to actually add a protective skin to it because of the hurricane forces that we get here if it comes through. So that's and it hasn't been awarded, but we're in the running for that, and I hope we're successful with it. But mainly commercial, industrial, and institutional projects with a heavy emphasis on the resorts, because again, tourism is the #1 industry here in the Bahamas. So I hope that answers your question.
There's a big emphasis in the Caribbean on sustainable tourism. More and more, the demand is really, certainly from the policy, internal and external policy level, is how well are we doing with sustainable tourism in terms of protecting the environment versus the demand for diversified products in tourism. And so I know, Mark, we can compare and share notes on that. We also have the demand here in Kingston for additional housing. It has been a very topical issue, certainly in terms of the type of housing that we're providing, the change in classification of neighborhoods and how we manage that, and how is that managed responsibly. And so we have to look at all of these variables to ensure that at the end of it, the people, the citizenry, their concerns are managed responsibly, and we respond in a manner that is akin to environmental responsibility and what we have to do to sustain our society and the modes by which we enact those levels of sustainability. And so many of the points that have been made throughout the discussion are absolutely important in terms of cross-learning for the development of both the Canada-based, Bahamas-based, Kingston-based, and other industry players that are on. One of the key low-hanging fruits, if you want to talk about that, is that we certainly at the local government level in Kingston are exploring the fact that we are too heavily fuel dependent on what we term as regular fuel. We want to probably actively transition using our garbage trucks and our public transportation into alternate energy uses. Certainly, the dependency on diesel fuel is one such which we need to really focus on. And so we want to be looking at policies that will introduce the use of alternate type fuels to reduce our carbon footprint. And certainly the most honorable Prime Minister would have said this at COP21 recently, just a few months ago in Glasgow, Scotland. So those are the kind of steps that we need to take. Certainly in building technology, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that we are into green building. We do the conditions of approval, which are based on water retention, water harvesting, water reuse, the use of different types of light entry, certainly for the dependence on the natural light resources, certainly instead of electric light resources, use of solar introduction. And of course, the private sector as well will be offering preferred loans to homeowners where they can use, certainly introduce their use of solar technology as part of their own home-based dependency. So we do continue to make that commitment in the right direction. Let me just look if we have any more questions coming in. No such far from our panelists. Let me ask Yasmin if there's any on her side that you'd like to introduce. Yasmin, anything from you?
One just came in, Robert, thank you. It is from the scope point of view, can you please indicate if there is any master plan and any particular phasing of the plan? We specialize in holistic, sustainable, smart city, responsive city planning.
Again, the question is open to our panelists. Very good question, very pointed question, very timely question. Is there a master plan? Jenny?
I can offer, I'll take a crack. It's so what I could offer in our practice, especially when doing development at our own risk, is we've learned that 80% of the decision making happens in the first kind of the concept planning phase of work, especially complex communities. And that's where we have the most ability to bring in solutions that are comprehensive, that are synergistic, that can actually make concepts like zero carbon lucrative from a financial perspective. They're obviously needed, but it can be really tricky to add technology over time as opposed to proactively at project initiation, setting clear goals and objectives and making that as mandatory as the financial budget. When those two things happen early on, we've seen a ton of success because everyone is working together towards the same goals. It might seem obvious, but it happens very rarely. So from my perspective, setting clear project objectives even before consultants are hired is really helpful. I hope that answers the question.
Anyone else want to take a crack at it? No, I think that's pretty comprehensive, certainly in terms of a response. It's very hard to lay out a master plan unless you would have now settled on your objectives and stuck to those objectives. And if those objectives obviously have to be measurable over time, also flexible to ensure that we take in other views and we learn from those objectives as we go through our project development phases. Yasmin, any other questions before we move to our closing remarks? We actually are running on time. Yasmin,
I don't see any more at this time, moderator.
Okay, thank you. Therefore, with Her Excellency's permission and not seeing additional questions, I'm going to do a last check just to make sure I see no additional questions coming here. Let me therefore invite in the order.
Before you do, sorry, yes. There is one.
All right,
that
great.
Just came in.
Welcome to Jeopardy.
What would make it easier for government agencies to adopt renewables in greater ways?
I would say, I would say it has to come from the political policymaking position. Therefore, it would have to come through cabinet, through parliament, and it actually becomes a legal policy that is requiring certainly government agencies to ensure that the transition would start. So again, my point, I'll hammer that home. It has to be from the standpoint of lead policy from central government and of course, local government as well. Anybody else? Jenny, Tania, Mark, I think we agree on that point, Jenny? Yeah? Thumbs up and speaking of heads. Okay, great, great, thank you. I think that would close out our Q&A and our interactive session. And so
just
therefore—
one last question.
This is good. This is good.
And we're gonna ask our High Commissioner to just respond. How do Bahamian firms joint venture with Canadian firms in this area?
Sorry, well, Yasmin, you put me on the spot because I was going to tell them to call you. But essentially, I was going to put a plug in my closing remarks, which I won't precipitate to contact the Senior Trade Commissioner Service here at the Canadian High Commission. I think maybe someone can put the details of how to reach you in the chat. But certainly, you know, we're quite interested in helping facilitate and do those. I joke that my Senior Trade Commissioner Service here is they're doing arranged introductions between companies and policymakers. So that's the best way to go about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I saw that Pierre Farmer may have been saying something. 1 second. I think Pierre Farmer, I saw somebody come in. I think it was Pierre Farmer that was coming in. I'm not sure. Yasmin, do you see it on your side just before we move to our closing segment?
Yes, I see. Without clear policies from central government, there is little incentive for new businesses to invest in innovative solutions.
Yeah.
That was the comment.
Aligns with what we were discussing earlier. So let me extend my gratitude for all who would have come on the platform to participate in this open Q&A question, interactive discussion segment, because I believe that we did in fact extract very critical information, very good learning and exchange, and certainly the discussion would have been fruitful and we would have come away with some significant points that we can build upon. And so at this time, as we move to close our conversations, let me invite for their respective 1-minute closing remarks. First, with Ms. Jenny McMinn, your closing remarks.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for having me and for all of those joining. I think that, you know, the spirit of the work, the urgency, the importance, a need to take action. I would just suggest that I think there is a lot to learn for Canadians from the great work that's been done in the Bahamas, particularly around resilience planning, water management and planning and reuse. I can say, unfortunately, in Canada, we are not paying enough attention to water as a valuable resource. And I think there's quite a lot we could learn in terms of both passive strategies and then also in the event of extreme weather events, what to do. And I think there's lots of good examples of successful solutions in the Bahamas. From a Canadian side, there's been a lot of great momentum towards collaborating, different ways of building training sessions, programs, methodologies, all of these things towards some of the solutions that have been talked about today. And I think, you know, speaking on behalf of the Canadian Green Building Council, we would love to collaborate and learn and share some of those resources as much as interested, and look forward to continuing the conversation that was initiated today. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. Mark, you're up.
Yeah, I just there's just a couple of more items I thought of, you know, during this conversation that I think there's a potentially a good link with Canada and the technologies coming out of Canada that would be very useful in the Bahamas, and that's CLT, which is cross-laminated timbers in the design of buildings and or partial components of buildings here, because you know, the predominant materials we use here in the Bahamas for constructing all of our buildings is really concrete, reinforced concrete and cement blocks, and some timber on roof structures and some structural steel. So, which, you know, have I think a huge carbon footprint to manufacture them. So, if now the biggest problem we have is everything in the Bahamas and throughout the Caribbean has to be shipped in on a boat or a barge, as you know, in Jamaica too. And there's not a lot of natural resources here in the Bahamas. So the majority of what we use here is imported. So it becomes very, very, very expensive. But I've seen a couple of projects recently with cross-laminated timber, and it's quite impressive. I really like it. It's sustainable, and you know, if you can address the termite issues that we have down here, I think it's got a lot of potential in the future. So, and I know one of the projects we looked at by a major developer that's just kicking off in one of the out islands, there was an emphasis to use a lot of timber in the design right from the client. So they were quite, I think, forward thinking in selecting certain building materials for their resort projects. So, but there's lots to talk about. And again, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a great experience to be part of this series. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Cross-laminated timber is pretty good solution. Now it's to Tania.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think the one thing that I can take away from our conversation today is that we all agree that we have a climate crisis and it's impacting us, whether that's on a resiliency level or driving for even GHG reductions and fuel switching opportunities that we may have heard a little bit about today. But we need to continue to drive some innovation. So we're not going to achieve our climate leadership goals by doing what we've always done. So continuing to adopt new innovations, find new solutions to those challenges that are there to meet those goals that are 2050 and 2080, and really not even the goals of potentially our lifetime, but the next generation's lifetime, and how we're going to be able to set each one of those up for success. So I would challenge us to do this through climate leadership, through policy development, and just through industry interactions, much like this one, that continue to share expertise, knowledge, and data so that we can continue to achieve global leadership. And just thank you for allowing me to share the success of SORIA today. And I hope I'll be able to share in the future some of the project successes that we'll have and the data that will come out of those projects as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tania. We did, in fact, learn quite a bit from you in terms of SORIA. And again, thank you for the presentation and thank you for your contribution as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to hand over to Her Excellency, the Ambassador, for her closing remarks. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Of course, I wanted to thank both Mr. Hill for your moderation and as well to all the panelists. I learned a lot. I know we're almost out of time, but I had a few moments where I was thinking, why haven't I heard more about passive design, for example? But I think in closing, and actually before I forget, I would of course like to thank my team for the great work organizing this. But I think, Tania, you hit on sort of what I wanted to close on, which is that thread about, you know, there's growing consensus around the climate emergency. And I think it's getting more and more real, certainly in Canada. You know, I'm from BC originally, and it's really been a tough year for BC on the climate front. And in the Caribbean, it's ever present. But you know, we talked about, you know, the need for both policy and innovation to tackle the climate change. And, you know, I think, Mr. Hill, you raised the need for political will and leadership, but you won't get political will and leadership unless you have a public that believes that that's what needs to be done. So I think discussions like this and the connections that are made are really important because it helps build kind of that momentum to incentivize the policy making sphere that you really need to do. Because I can't remember now who said this, but you're very right. I think, you know, we're not lazy, but you need incentives sometimes. And, you know, if there's standards which are low, there's no real incentive to do better unless there's some, you know, bigger, a broader framework. So I really appreciated this discussion and also just ended up with this hopeful idea that really there is a plan and there is a way we can work together. But now is the time to kind of keep on making that effort. And I know, you know, the uncertainty of the last couple of years, it's hard to almost keep on making efforts, but we have that imperative of the climate change emergency. So really heartened by the work you're doing and looking forward to hearing more from participants in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And let me, for my own part, thank you for the opportunity to have served as the moderator for this panel. I hope that I was able to satisfy and at least meet the expectations of you, the organizers, our panelists, and our guests who joined us. I believe that we learned quite a bit through this very short exchange, and that I personally have extracted very valuable information that we'll use further in our own sustainable development commitments here in Kingston. And let me also thank the participants who logged on from the Bahamas. This was targeted for your benefit. And of course, we continue as a community to learn and grow from each other. And so with those few words, on behalf of His Worship the Mayor, my management team and staff, let me thank all of you, particularly you, Your Excellency, for the kind invitation for me to be your moderator this afternoon. And I'll be available anytime again, of course, for free. And so, I'm just kidding. Let me thank our friends in Canada, and let me thank Mark and everyone who organized this very, very important, significant conversation with Canada. And of course, again, anytime Kingston is available to participate and contribute, we will be able and willing to do so. Let me thank you once again, and my eternal gratitude to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye, everyone.